All right, welcome everybody. We're gonna get started. It's 6 o'clock. Everybody got here really early, except for a few stragglers, so thanks for showing up on time and despite the weather and everything. My name's Stephen Lower. I am one of the few people that help run this event. I have an office just on this floor, so if you ever need to come and ask me questions, this is where I work out of. So, our other speaker unfortunately got called into work. He does double duty as a police officer, so you can imagine that when they call him in, he kind of has to go. So you guys are stuck with me for about 40 minutes. So we're going to do a presentation talking about creative, let's get to the topic. Creative real estate financing, both in the US and Canada. Talk about what creative financing is, how you can use it towards getting, attaining your goals with real estate, and both on both sides of the border. So we'll talk about a few of the differences, why some strategies work really well up here and work even better in the US. And then after that, I'm going to invite up Dustin. He's going to do a short intro, tell you a little bit about his background. And then we were going to do a 3-person panel. Of course, Mitch isn't here, so just be Dustin and I. And that'll be an opportunity for you guys to just do Q&A. We'll do a little bit of a panel, and so you can ask one of us specifically a question, or both of us if you want to hear our different responses based on our experiences. And then we'll have time afterwards to do some networking. You guys have already been doing lots of networking, so thank you for doing that. And as you guys may or may not know this, but there's lots of players in this room. There's lots of people that are doing deals. They have capital. They're looking to invest in deals. So make sure you find those people in the room. Let them know, why you're here and what you're looking for and what you have to offer, right? So if I'm a fix and flipper, you want to tell people, I'm a fix and flipper. I'm looking for fix and flip deals, and I'm looking for joint venture partners that have capital that want to invest in deals. We'll talk a little bit more about that just before we break for networking. So, any questions before we get going? All right, you guys are in for a treat. Let's jump into it here. So, for those of you that haven't heard me speak before, my background is a bit unique. I had the opportunity of working with a small team, and we were apartment building flippers. So we would buy small apartment buildings in Western Canada, we'd fix them up, and then we'd sell them. The goal was to basically hold them for as little time as possible. One of the partners, he hated owning real estate. So as soon as he bought it, he's like, how do we get rid of this thing? And so we often would not do the fix-ups ourselves. We would finance the buyer and help them do the fix-ups. And we would de-risk the deal quite substantially by doing that. So during my time with this team, we bought and sold over 750 multifamily units in Western Canada and did about 200 million in transactions. I got to be in charge of the majority of the process, excluding, I didn't do any property management and I didn't do any of the phone calls talking to the sellers. So I was in charge of the underwriting, the due diligence, ordering the appraisals, organizing the capital stack, putting all the capital together to buy the property, and then also doing all the creative financing techniques, strategies, and structures to acquire and dispose of that real estate. So I've got lots of experience both being the borrower and the seller, aka lender, with lots of financial transactions. And in 2015, I moved on and started my own company called Lions Den Capital, and we are a private lending company. So we manage about 25 million that we use as private mortgages. We lend that out, and we do all sorts of creative financing structures. And so that's a little bit of my background and why I feel like I can talk a little bit about some of these topics here today. So I think the best way to teach something is to show an example. So we're just going to talk about a deal. So this deal, single family home in Calgary, double attached garage, over 1,800 square feet, Southwest Calgary, nice location. The property is vacant, was vacant. A fix and flipper from out of town. So about a year and a half ago, I don't know if you guys remember, everybody from Ontario was like, prices in Ontario are too high. I'm going to come buy in Alberta. So a fix and flipper from Ontario thought, I'm just going to do that. It's going to be really simple. And whatever happened, it went bad. And now it's still vacant and is not finished. So it needs about another 80,000 to 100,000 to finish it. But once it's finished, it should be worth around 900,000, depending on how well you do the finishings, maybe more. So there's about $150,000 in gross margin between your purchase price, what you're putting into it. So you could purchase this for about $650,000. Okay, this is what it looks like. As you can see, part done, needs some cabinets, needs some flooring, but a lot of the hard work is done. Wall's been moved. So no bank. So this is the wall that we all hit, right? So we're looking at a deal. Somebody sends us an opportunity. A realtor sends us something. We find something online. We see something on a Facebook group. And we're like, oh, this looks great. And then we hit the wall, right? The big wall. It's like, how am I going to finance this thing? How am I going to come up with $650,000 to buy it, another $100,000 to do the reno, and the carrying costs, and, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how we get over the wall. But this is typically the wall that I hit, and I'm sure that most of you hit, is we hit the wall. No bank wants to lend on a property that looks like this, right? If you guys have ever tried to get an appraisal, get an approval from a bank, they're going to look at this and go, can somebody move in there today? No, we don't want to touch it, right? So no bank is going to lend on it. It's in foreclosure. And so if you're buying a foreclosure, as most of you know, you have to generally submit an unconditional offer, right? So you can't have a financing condition. You have to come in with an all cash offer, even though it doesn't have to be cash. And as I mentioned, coming up with that $650,000 plus another 100 for the renos is tough. So how can we get a deal like this done? Welcome to Creative Finance. So for those of you, is anybody here part of Pace Morby's communities? Great, we got a few. So I'm part of Pace Morby's communities, Sub 2 and Owners Club. And as part of being, as a part of, let me try that again. Being a part of his community, we have the opportunity to have access to some tools. One of them is something he calls Pace AI. So it's an AI agent, basically, or a chatbot that you ask and it'll respond as though it's Pace Morby, which is pretty cool. He's programmed in all of his history and background and templates and knowledge. So I asked Pace AI, I said, tell me about creative financing. This is the response that I got. So I'm not going to read it out, but essentially it's helping you fix the problem, the wall, right? It's helping you come up with creative solutions to get through how do I buy this thing creatively without having to come up with the $650,000 plus the $100,000 plus the this, and this. If you know anything about Pace, he loves buying deals with little to no money down, no bank approvals, all those types of things, right? So let's talk about what does this look like. So the big term that Pace uses, of course, in the US is subject to. That's the name of the community as well. It's called Sub 2. Does anybody know what subject to is? Do you want to share with us what subject to is?
Subject to is a problem solving, just like you said. If for one example, I own a house, I list it for $600K. It's not selling. 3 months it's been listed, it's not selling because I listed for 600 and either the market is low or the property doesn't worth 600. Then there is a buyer who wants to buy this property, but he does not want it to deal with bank because he already hit that wall. He had way too many in his basket. He's not approved, just like all of us are here too. So that's the solution where someone comes in and offer me that buyer can assume my mortgage. We used to have it in Canada as well, but this is not assume, it's subject to. So they will offer me a little bit. Let's say if I wanted 600, I know I have some equity as well. They are gonna assume my mortgage. They will take the payments over. The mortgage is still gonna be on my name, but the title is gonna be on buyer's name. I will get a note so I can share with bank if I have to buy another property. I will be off the hook from the mortgage. Now, the buyer will pay for the mortgage payments. He will have the title as well. He will own the property because the title is on his name. I'm off the hook, but I will get the equity out from the buyer. So if I have a 200K, he's gonna pay me 200K. I can take it to seller finance as well, that he can pay me in payments, but that 200K, I put it in my pocket and move over. My problem was solved. I sold the property for 600K, even if it was if it was not worth 600, if it was 550 or 500. Buyer's problem is solved because he doesn't have to go to the bank. The mortgage was already approved for my name. It doesn't happen in Canada.
Excellent. That's a very good explanation. Thank you for that. So he's exactly right. So when you buy a property subject to, and again, this happens mostly in the US, you're buying the property subject to the existing mortgage that's on title. And so you take over the mortgage. The way that Pace explains it, he says, why would I go out and get a brand new mortgage and incur all these new fees and blah, 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 when I can just take over your mortgage? And oftentimes, especially if you're buying something that's been financed in the last 5 years or so, the interest rate is always much lower as well than what's in the market in the US. So you may take over a mortgage of $400,000 and it may be at a 2.9% interest rate versus today it might be 6.5. So that's the benefit to subject to. Now, does it happen in Canada? Yes and no. Not as often, and the main reason, of course, is because in the US, when you get a loan for a 25-year amortized loan, you get a loan for 25 years. You don't have to renew it. You don't have to reset the rate. It's there for 25 years. So the subject to model works great in the US. It doesn't work as well here because, as we all know, every 3, 5, 10 years, depending on our term that we sign up for in Canada, that term comes due and we've got to either renew or requalify or refinance or do something ridiculous. Sometimes our lender will exit the market and then we're stuck and we have to refinance and get a new lender to come in. There's lots of messes. So that's the main reason why this one doesn't work in Canada. Great. Seller finance. Now this is the one that I love and it works on both sides of the border. Does anybody want to give us a shot at what seller finance is? Not you.
Shanti did mention it. Shanti, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically the current owner who's selling the property would agree to accept payments over time. So they're technically financing to the buyer, so the deal can go through.
Perfect. Great explanation. Thank you. And that works both in Canada and the US. So, and we'll talk about a couple of different scenarios where the property is not fully paid off. So a seller can carry financing with a fully paid off property. So they own the property free and clear. They can carry seller financing. It's really simple. They can also do a version of seller finance when there's an existing loan. One is subject to with a hybrid where you're carrying some of the equity behind. You got it. We're not going to get too deep into the structures today, but I definitely want to let you guys know how some of these work. So one of the options to carry financing is with something called a wrap. Does anybody know what a wrap mortgage is? The best way that I remember it being explained to me is imagine you got a house that's kind of like a potato, right? You put the potato in the oven, it gets really hot, and you take it out and you wrap it in tinfoil, right? So it's like a wrap mortgage. So the mortgage on the property is the potato, and the wrap is all of the other terms that you apply to it with your seller financing. So I'll give you an example. So, and the unique thing about the wrap is that the title does transfer. So if I'm going to do a seller finance deal, I own a house, it's worth $500,000, I owe about $300,000, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've got $100,000 down, I'd like to buy your property. And I look at it and go, okay, that's a decent risk. I'll collect your 100 and I'll carry 400. I owe 300. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a wrap. So I'm going to have an agreement between me and the buyer to carry financing. And what I'm going to do is instead of him paying my loan and then me on a separate loan, I'm going to say, no, you just pay me. I'm going to wrap. I'm going to be the tinfoil around the potato, and you pay me and I'll pay the underlying mortgage. That makes me feel a lot more secure knowing that I'm making the payment to my loan, even though I've transferred the title to the new buyer. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. I see a lot of heads nodding, so that's good. The similar version of that, but a little different, is called an agreement for sale. In the US, they call it a contract for deed. In some of the states, they still call it agreement for sale. In the agreement for sale, it's very similar where we're doing a wrap, but we're not transferring the title. So the title would remain in the seller's name, but the buyer would have an agreement called an agreement for sale, which gives him beneficial interest in the property. So they can renovate the property, live in the property, rent out the property. They can even sell the property. They can refinance the property. Their name's just not on the title yet. And once they complete the agreement for sale, so let's say that they agreed to buy it for $500,000 over a 2-year period, and when they pay the remaining amount owing on the agreement for sale, then they would get the title and it would transfer to their name. Okay, everybody understand the difference between agreement for sale and wrap? Wrap, you get the title. Agreement for sale, you don't. And there's some reasons why you would structure it one way versus another. We'll get into that a little further as we go along. Lease options are a bit of a hybrid between a wrap and an agreement for sale. So they're a little bit more contract friendly, you might say. Again, depending on how you structure it. I've done a few lease options. What I prefer to do is actually have two separate contracts. I like to have a rental agreement, a lease agreement, and then a separate option agreement or a purchase contract. It's easier for the banks to understand when they go to refinance it. It's easier for to boot them out as well if they decide to not pay their rent. Novations. Who knows what a novation is? Yeah? Let's see if we got anybody else. Dustin, you want to take a crack at novations? No?
I'll let them kind of.
Okay. Do you want to
hide the knowledge?
let us know what the novation is?
What I didn't went too much deep into it, but novation is where it's you flipping it basically, but you're not taking the title on your name.
Yeah, that's a good example or a good explanation. So I'll give you an example. So there's an older person that's been living in their house for years. They've got a house in Willow Park, and it's a nice old bungalow, but it's all original condition, 1964 carpet. You can picture it, right? And elderly person is now looking to sell it and move into an old folks home. So right now, the way it is, it's maybe worth $600,000. But once it's fixed up, it's probably worth about $1 million, $1.1 million. So instead of the fix and flipper going and saying, well, I'm going to pay you your $600,000 and you can just move on, you go to the seller and you say, how about we get you moved out? I'm going to renovate the property, I'm going to sell it, and we're going to share in the profits. So it's essentially a joint venture agreement that you're doing with the seller. And instead of coming up with all the money for the down payment, coming up with any money to buy it, some financing to buy it, you're basically just joint venturing with the existing seller who usually owns it free and clear. And you have an agreement that's stipulates timelines and costs and who's going to carry the costs and who's going to do this and this and this. Generally, the person that's doing the renovation will bring in the renovation money. That's what they're bringing to the table, and they'll put in all the sweat equity and do the actual work. And then when the property sells, usually the first thing that happens is everybody gets their money back. So the seller would get their $600,000 that they were the market value. The renovator would get his $100,000 that he put into the property. And then the realtor would get paid and everybody else. And then all the other profits you can split. And again, depending on what you can negotiate, that can be 60-40, 50-50, 30-70, whatever you guys manage to do. So it's a really creative way, again, to buy or control a piece of property without having to come up with $600,000 to buy the property. I've done some novations with some of our borrowers. They're pretty unique. They usually work out well because there's no when you're doing a fix and flip, for example, generally you're borrowing money at high interest rates. You're usually borrowing private money, and so you got this crazy timeline. It's every day is $275, and so it's day. Whereas when you're doing this with a seller, usually it's a little more calm because again the property's already owned free and clear. There's a little bit more room to do a really nice renovation to maybe bring in an architect and move some walls because these big old properties are great, but somebody wants to pay $1.1 million for a house. They don't want a lipstick renovation, as you can imagine, right? All right. So in each of these situations, we have different players. We've got the owner and or a lender that's involved in here, and the owner sometimes may be the lender. These do not all work as a great acquisition strategy, and they don't all work as a great disposition strategy. Each one has its benefits for an acquisition or a disposition. For example, I would never buy on a wrap. I would only sell on a wrap. Does anybody know why? Dustin does.
You're going to pay the higher price at the end of the day, right? Because you're selling it you want a profit.
Yeah, so if I'm buying on a wrap, somebody's basically using their underlying mortgage, let's say a bank loan at 4%, and they're wrapping it, and maybe I'm paying 6% on the whole thing. So I don't want to be paying 6%. I'd prefer to just either take over the loan or break it into two different chunks or do an agreement for sale where I can basically only pay the cost. So in my mind, and Pace has shared this as well, he says, I never acquire on a wrap. I'll acquire on an agreement for sale. The only reason you might acquire on a wrap, especially in the US, is for the depreciation. Because when you do have the title in your name, you get to claim the depreciation. If you're buying on an agreement for sale, you don't have the title, and so you don't get the depreciation. So if that's part of your strategy in the US, that's something you want to be aware of. All right. So in our example for the house here in Calgary, if we wanted to halt the foreclosure, we could go and buy it for $650,000 and negotiate something with the existing seller. So in foreclosure, I don't know if you guys know much of the foreclosure rules and laws. How's it going, brother? You can, there's a redemption period. So generally the court is going to say to the seller, hey, Mr. Owner, you're behind on your mortgage. The lender's foreclosing, but I'm going to give you some time to redeem. And that's to either sell the property, refinance and pay out the loan, or win the lottery and pay out the loan with cash or an inheritance or whatever happens. Sometimes people sell a different property, for example, and use that cash to pay out the loan. And that redemption period can last anywhere from 1 day to 6 months in Alberta. Okay? So during the time of foreclosure, the borrower the homeowner can still sell the property. Okay, so even though it's judicially listed, they can technically still sell the property as long as they bring everybody current and pay out the existing loans. So if we negotiated with the loan holder, the borrower, and brought the loan current and brought in our renos, our total cost would be about $750,000. And this would be a lot cheaper than buying it for cash for $650,000 plus doing the renos, right? And I'm just going to walk you through some of the numbers here just so you can see what this might look like. So again, $900,000 sale price. I think on this deal, they said that if you were to do the windows and do a full reno, that you could get a price closer to about $1 million, but I'm going to be conservative here. Realtor costs, some carrying costs. So you're looking at about $87,000 profit. And the nice thing too is that most of the work's been done, right? All the electrical's been done, the plumbing's been done. You're basically just doing the finishing work, some countertops, cabinets, countertops, and flooring and some paint. Now, let's flip that. And if, say, we were going to buy this from foreclosure, you would have to come up with the $650,000 down to buy it, plus your renovation cost. And you'd probably end up with the same amount of profit. Your carrying costs may not be as much, again, depending on where you get this from. Maybe you've got $650,000 sitting in your bank account, which would be great. And this would be a good flip. Now, if we were to, I just want to walk you guys through this. So if you went out and got a private lender for $500,000, so as I mentioned, when you're buying through a foreclosure, the court generally won't accept anything other than a unconditional offer. So what you can do, of course, is you can go out and you can get pre-approved with a private lender or a joint venture partner, and you can find financing and you can use that financing. You just can't put it in your offer. So you can do all that work ahead of time and then go and buy the property. So let's say you found yourself a private lender that was going to give you $500,000. And let's say you found yourself a private money partner or a joint venture partner to bring in part of the down payment and your renovation budget. So in theory, you could get into this deal for $0 down if you're a Pace Morby fan. And again, if you look at our sale price, you're looking at about an $87,000 profit in about 3 months. Now, depending on how you split that, you might give 40% to you and 60% to your joint venture partner, $52,000 for them. I think if you promise somebody a 21% return, don't promise. If you indicated to somebody that you were going to give them a 21% return within about 3 months, I think you'd have a lot of people lining up to say, yeah, I'd do that deal with you for sure. Now, the cool thing is that deal is actually available today. It's on the MLS, it's listed, it's available. So if you guys are interested in that deal, just message me, the word today, and I'll send you the details so you guys can go and take that one down. And if you need a private lender, I know a guy. But anyway, I wanted to give you guys a real example of something that's actionable where you guys can go, oh, wait, I can actually do that deal today? That's pretty amazing, right? So before we jump into the next section here, I wanted to go into, yeah, right? It's coming, don't worry. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how creative financing differs in the US and Canada. We touched on it a little bit. Do we have anybody that's currently doing anything in the US that's buying or is active in the US? besides Wade that's ready to jump down? Yeah, you're doing some wholesaling, right? Anything else? And what types of deals are you looking for? Are you looking for low equity? Or are you looking for?
I mean, if they owned it outright, it would be great, but RV park, mobile home park, so, yeah. Well, like,
Yeah. Low equity works really well in the single family home region. And with RV parks and stuff, it's a little less favorable and challenging. But yeah, there's some creative structures there as well. Cool. So does anybody know why in the US people would be targeting properties that have low equity? If we're looking at creative financing strategies?
I have a little idea on that. If it's low equity, if it's my house, I have low equity and I have to move out, I would just easily move out. It easy to sell. If I have more equity, then I just wanted to stick onto it. I want more out of it. Whatever equity is there, I want to take it over with me.
Right.
I think that's probably easier wait for getting the property with low equity.
Yeah, so the motivation with low equity, or the strategy with low equity is a subject to deal. So if it's low equity, that means, they, let's say they bought the house with 5% down, right? So they bought a house for $500,000, they put 5% down. Now, if they were to sell it a month later, the realtor fees and closing costs, even if they sold it at the same price they bought it, they would still lose money. They would still have to write a check. And so in the US, they would call that a low equity deal. And the strategy there is to approach them and say, hey, instead of me, buying this property, even though I'm not going to buy for $500 cash, you're still going to have to write a check, let's say for $10,000 to get rid of this property after all the costs. How about if I just take over your loan? How about if I just buy your property subject to, and in fact, I'm going to give you $5,000 to help you move and move across the country for whatever reason. So that's an example of low equity.
Yeah, so that too, like the low equity is, like you said, they never think about the fees, like the lender fees, the realtor fees and everything. You never think about kind of those, right? And to get a realtor wants their fees and they want to get paid. That's the main thing about it. So seller finance allows you to sell it higher and also allows the buyer to come capitalize on that loan, because not only is it expensive for them to sell, it's also expensive for me as a buyer to come, because I have to pay all these lender fees to come put a new loan onto this property when I can just give them I could probably give them the $500K on seller finance as long as the term made sense. And then I didn't have to pay the lender fees. I didn't have to pay all the closing costs, because, people used to buy homes every 30 years. Now people buy homes every 5 years. So who's winning right now is the lawyers and the lenders and the realtors, right? So we're trying to save all those fees as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that.
In this scenario, how does the buyer benefit from that?
How does the buyer benefit from buying a property with low equity?
Yeah.
So essentially, if the property's a $500,000 property, right, and the loan on it, let's say, is $475,000, so I would approach the seller and I would say, hey, Mr. Seller, you're going to have a hard time selling this, because by the time you pay your fees, you're going to owe more than you are going to get. You're going to net from the sale. So if he was to sell it after paying all the realtor fees and closing costs, he might only net out of the sale $465,000, but he owes $475,000. So he literally has to write a check on the closing date to the bank or to his lawyer to be able to close that transaction. So as a buyer, instead of coming out and saying, I'm going to put 20% down or 25% down, and I'm going to go out and qualify for in Canada it would be a bank mortgage. In the US it would be a DSCR loan of some sort. Instead of me doing all of that and getting a 6 to an 8% interest rate, why don't I just go and say, how about I give you $5,000? You're now $5,000 ahead of the negative 10 you would have been, so you're $15,000 better, and I'm just going to take over your loan. So I benefit because I'm only putting $5,000 down to buy a $500,000 property, so that's a 1% down payment, right? And I don't have to go to the bank to qualify.
But when you own all the problems of selling again.
Yeah, so my goal in this transaction is not to sell, it would be to hold it long term. Yeah, so this wouldn't be good for a fix and flip, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. there are some deals that do make sense on a fix and flip. So again, if the property is worth 500,000, but you know that if you put $50,000 into it, it's going to be worth 650,000, then it still works as a flip, right?
And I had one question in the innovations deal structure. Let's say the buyer comes in and I put the money for the renovations and we have this agreement. How do you protect yourself if for whatever reason it collapses and it's not favorable anymore? Is there something that goes on the title saying I also have interest, and how does that?
Yeah, good question. So it would be a great question for your lawyer, but essentially when you do that agreement, you would work out all of those protections. So the seller is going to have the same concerns, and he's going to go, how do I know you're not just going to like come in and ruin my house and then leave halfway through? Or what happens if you get abducted by aliens halfway through the reno? Then what am I doing, right? So there would be a number of ways of the contract would spell out the protections of what happens in this situation, what happens in that situation. And you're right. If let's say that the seller halfway through just decides, hey, I don't want to sell this property anymore. How are you protected? Yeah, exactly. So all those things would have to be taken into account. Yeah, great questions. So that's a low equity deal. Let's talk now about a high equity deal or a property that's free and clear. So which strategy would make sense if a property is owned free and clear by a seller? Seller finance, good. Why does that make sense? Somebody walk me through the conversation you're going to have with the seller on why seller finance would be a good idea for me being the seller.
So if the seller agrees to go by seller finance, they own free and clear, they are paying capital gains tax on all the money that they're getting from the sale. They can also require interest over the payment period that is agreed upon. So massive benefit on monthly income and amortization of interest over there. Right.
Any other thoughts on benefits?
They could potentially get a higher price because
Exactly.
Excellent. Yeah, potentially a higher price, right? So the big conversation that investors have when they're buying property is either price or terms, right? So if you talk to Jamil's a wholesaling wizard. So when he's talking with a seller and he's negotiating with them, oftentimes they're going after distressed real estate for wholesaling, right? So his business model is we call all these people that are going through foreclosure, that are having problems, that have liens on their property, or what do they call it in the U.S.? Code infractions. You guys heard of these things? Or back taxes, all these different things. So they'll get these lists, they'll make the calls, and they'll call these people that have distress. And so they'll say, well, do you want price or do you want terms? So if the property's worth $400,000 today, they might want to buy it for about 30 or 40% discount. So they'll say, I'll give you $250,000 for it cash today, quick close, and you just need to sign here. And they go, whoa, I want like $400,000 for this thing. And so they'll say, oh, no problem. Then what I'm looking for are terms. So if you want your price, I want terms. If you just don't care about the price, then I'm going to give you a low cash quick deal and I don't need any terms, right? There's no seller carry, there's nothing. Here's your cash and you can move on. So anytime you're having conversations with sellers and you're doing this in whether that's here or in the US, always talk about price or terms. So finding the seller's motivation, determining what it is exactly that they're looking for. I find in general in Canada, everybody's looking for price. They want that big price. And so if you position it right and you say, hey, no problem, I'd love to help you get your price. What kind of terms are you willing to offer at that price, right? And at that point, you can start having the conversation to see what that conversation looks like. Then we look at all of the different options that we have, all the tools in our tool belt to say, which of these strategies make sense for this situation, right? So for us, sometimes when we bought a property, I'll give you an example. We were buying a 12-unit apartment building. They had 3 years left on a mortgage with a bank. And they said, if we pay this mortgage out today, we're going to have like a $40,000 prepayment penalty. So we said, okay, well, that would suck. So let's figure out a way that we can structure a deal where that doesn't happen, but we can still, do what we want to do with the property. So we looked at it and said, how about we structure an agreement for sale? The existing loan stays in place, the property stays in your name, the title stays in your name, and we have an agreement where we are now the beneficial owner of the property, so we rent it out. we can renovate it, and we can eventually sell it. And we put in there a stipulation that if we sold it before their mortgage term date, that we were responsible for the prepayment penalty. So we solved all of the sellers' concerns, all of their challenges, and because we were able to do that, they said, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Let's roll forward on that based on that basis." Does that make sense?
In this scenario, does the actual lender know about the agreement that is, are they involved? And I don't think so they would be happy if they would hear that.
Yeah, good question. So with an agreement for sale, it's a little bit like almost like leasing your property. So if you can imagine a commercial property, right? You've got a commercial, let's say a warehouse bay, and let's say I'm running my mechanic shop out of it, and eventually I decide, you know what, running a mechanic shop isn't really for me. I'm just going to lease it out to a flooring company, right? So I've got ATB as my bank, and they're in first position there. And ATB now says, hey, what's happening with this property? Oh, don't worry about it. I've got a lease. I've got a tenant in place. He's paying me $10,000 a month, and I'm paying you $5,000 a month for the mortgage. And they look at that and go, oh, this is even better than your financials were before, right? So it's the same kind of idea. So you're selling the property for a higher price than what's owed on the mortgage, obviously, and you're receiving that money each month. And that's either coming from the borrower's own resources, but generally if you're buying a income-producing property, it's coming from the rents of the property. So one, the title's never transferred, so you're not in breach of any contracts. You're not subject to the due on sale clause. And the lender in general, one, they don't know unless you decide to tell them about it, and so some sellers do. But two, they go, oh, so you're telling me now that I've got two borrowers that are trying to pay my loan? Oh, that's good. Because obviously if the buyer doesn't pay it, the seller's going to pay it because he doesn't want it to go into foreclosure. So they look at it and go, all right, so I've got the property, I've got the rents, I've got your personal guarantee, and I've got some other dude that paid more money and is also vested. Yeah, that makes sense. That was a good question though. Any other questions about, that was agreement for sales? All right. We're going to move on to the next section here, guys. I'm going to introduce Dustin. He's going to give a 5-minute introduction on a little bit of what he's been doing for the last, how long you've been doing it? 10, 12 years?
On and off, but
On and off, yeah.
pretty serious the last few
Cool.
years.
Yeah, come on up here, spend a few minutes, and then we'll do some question and answer here on our little panel discussion.
All right, you guys. I don't know how to start this, but pleased to meet you guys. I grew up in the trades. I always wanted to be in real estate, but I hit that wall. Realtors, everybody says you need to make money. You need to have money to get in real estate. I learned many, many years ago how to buy real estate with no money. I'm a big fan of zero down. How can I get this thing with no money? I learned from a guy, Ron LeGrand, he was an older guy. And I studied this for years. And I kept talking to realtors and everything, and everyone's like, you're stupid. Go get traditional financing. That's how we buy houses. And then randomly, I met a guy that says, you're stupid for thinking that you got to go get traditional financing to get houses. So he pieced it together because I learned the American way. And it was a little bit different than Canadian. And of course, when you don't have anybody to talk to because they're very fixed on one way, and seller finance is, it's the golden goose up here. Nobody really talks about that. It was hard for me to explain it. So he pieced it together. The last little bit, basically the money part of understanding how the mortgages and everything and the beneficial owner and whatnot. And I just went to town. So I just started wholesaling. I acquired a few properties. We did some fix and flips. I got a bunch of agreement for sales, a bunch of vendor takebacks. I'm a firm believer of, you can get a deal. I've gotten lots of deals for $1. For 30-year terms for the whole mortgage term. So it's definitely out there, but it's just how you structure it and how you work it out. So that's a little bit about me. I've done vendor takebacks. I've done seller financing. Subject 2 is essentially just very similar to agreement for sale. Different provinces, it's the right to purchase. So you just learn, it's all the same kind of path, just a little bit different lingo. So a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've done it all in Canada. So, I've heard about the US and I've got my sites out there, but I've got a lot of work in homeland. There's so many properties up in Canada. You know, just on the drive here, I got a bunch of leads that came in. Right now, it's a time of, you know, low equity. People are looking for the seller financing. This is a great time. I've had realtors call me and says, "You're probably busy."
Seller finance I can understand here, but subject to in Canada, how would that happen? Because if I have mortgage on my name, soon as the title changes, they know right away.
But we're blending the US with Canada, right? So we have to go to Canadian laws. So basically, it is subject to the existing mortgage, but the existing mortgage would stay with the seller's name. They would hold the title, and then we become the beneficial owners. So we get to rent it, we get to renovate it, we get to flip it, et cetera, right? So that allows us to have the power of that property to rent it out. And I'm a long-term player. I mean, everybody's different. They want to get their cash, get out. And I'm the nature of every deal is different. You know, if it's a cash deal that we got to get out quick, well, that's the exit out, right? I like to hold as long as I can. So I like to do really long terms.
But isn't it not here like if title is on my name and mortgage is on my name, then my hands are tied. I can't get another mortgage. I cannot find another place to get more mortgage, right? Is that not?
Well, that's why you got to get creative with financing, right?
That's what the problem is here in Canada. That's why we are looking in states, because in states they can still get a note and they can still qualify to get another mortgage, but here we cannot.
So that's why you start hunting. You get really good at hunting. You know, I don't have a job, I'm a business owner and I buy properties. You know, you get creative, and you know, I studied Pace, I studied Jerry Norton, I studied all these guys. I've watched all their videos over the last few years and everything. And I'm a guy that I've made so many messes, that's how I learn. You know, and you just got to get out there, you got to get creative. And Pace said, you know, if you got 100 grand in your bank, it's amazing that you'll give that 100 grand to that deal, but if you have no money in your bank, you will find every way possible to buy that deal with no money. That's where the mind changes. And that roadblock that you're talking about is that's when you got to really sit back and just kind of think, how can I get more properties, but not using my financing to acquire these properties?
Excellent. Well done. Well said.
Yeah.
Come sit here for a minute. We're going to do a little panel, so you guys can ask questions to either one of us or both of us. But before we jump into that, I want to dig into Dustin because he does some cool stuff. I don't know if you guys know this. I want to hear just a little bit about what do you do to find deals and leads?
So where I started this business,
No secrets. You don't have to
no
tell your
secrets. It's a grind. You know, it's not for the weak. Real estate, I tell everybody they all want in real estate, you got to be calling, you got to be grinding. You know, when I got in this business, I used to get lists of properties. I would write letters. I used to work up north, and I'd write 50 letters a day, and then 350 letters a week, and then my week off, I would go hand deliver them at every house. So I was nonstop. In my vehicle, I would have a stack of papers that were ready to go for houses. So if I seen a distressed property, I would drop it off, or I would go talk to them. You know, it's bird dogs, you know, driving for dollars, you know, leverage realtors. Realtors, not all of them know seller finance. I've done a lot more deals without realtors, but you can leverage them, right? So, and then I met lenders, I met, you know, I built a lot of lead generations myself because I realized the amount of work it took to do all that, and it wasn't allowing me to scale my business and allowing me to scale myself to get out of that grind. So you get a lot of appreciation when you're nonstop door knocking and calling and, you know, reaching out to people, and then you realize you don't go to houses unless they're ready to sell.
Awesome.
Just to add to what you said, for everybody that's new here, bird dogging is such a great way to get started and build your network right away. It's huge potential to make money as well.
Does everybody know what bird dogging is?
You just keep on calling. You get a list from foreclosed properties or distressed properties, or from properties that been listed for a long time. You just get all the data and you just keep calling them, asking them. If it's expired listing, you still call them and ask them what was the reason it was expired, and you talk to seller, convince them there's different ways, different creative ways to sell it. That's what I think bird dogging comes in.
Yeah, great. So bird dogging for me is basically doing any type of searching activity to find motivated sellers, to find distressed properties, And then because if I was new, I would say, I don't have $650,000 to buy this property. I don't know how to renovate it. I don't have the resources, but I can take this lead to somebody like Dustin and say, hey, I found this deal. I think there's something here. Will you pay me a referral fee or a bird dog fee for bringing you a deal like this? And most of the active investors would say, yeah, you're going to save me all the time of calling and doing the lists and blah, blah, blah. If you're going to bring me a deal, I can pay you a fee for referring me and bringing me that information. So that's, yeah, excellent. That's what bird
And
dogging
it's
is.
not just property, it could be contacts, it could be money, it could be anything you want.
Could be a really good home builder.
How many people are
contractor.
Ubering right now, right? So if you can connect with people that are Ubering and you can say, if you see a distressed property, can you give me that address when you drive by?
Good, very good.
Right? You got to hunt. Like, this is the difference between, the guys that are hunting, sitting back. You got to be on it. You got to be willing to make the mistakes. I didn't have anybody to teach me. I had to go make some hard lessons myself. Very expensive lessons, but I learned. And I learned as fast as I could, and I took the blows, and they were hard. But you learn, and you get faster, you get quicker, and then you understand kind of the whole process of it. And then you leverage yourself that now I have bird dogs, I have lead generations, I have realtors, I have people calling me saying, hey, I have a deal because I've just positioned myself in that.
I used a different approach, advertising. So I put out ads for motivated homeowners. So people that were, basically there's the 4Ds, a death in the family, divorce, downsizing, or they have a lot of debt. And also people that were over leveraged, they couldn't afford to sell their property. And I was able to pick up 10 properties that way, just from putting out an ad.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. What was your ads? Was it Facebook ads or in the classifieds?
Yeah.
See, and going back to what she says, over the time you get so many calls that you hear those trigger words, right? And I have a list of like divorce, loss of job, they're moving out of province. So I can hear these words when I'm listening, and I instantly know when you get 2 or more of those problems, you're gonna get a deal, because they are super motivated to work. So over time, you're definitely building rapport and everything, but you're really listening to these trigger words, because seller finance is like, you can't just go to them and say, can I buy your property over terms? How I found the best method was coming in with a low cash offer, really kind of giving them that cash offer, and they're like, I can't take that. You blame it on the investors that all they care about is money. So it's us versus them. And then you say, well, how about this? What if I was willing to come way up on the price, put more money in your pocket? Do you think you'd be open to working creatively with me? And now the seller is like, well, you just gave me a gut shot with that price, but you're telling me you're willing to come up to the price on it? And then it gives them, an opportunity to start talking about terms. And, when I first got in this, I was like, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. Seller finance is less is more. Less is more, because people aren't comprehending like we are. They're not comprehending the numbers. They're not comprehending this. So I'll even pull off and I'll send them an email that gives them a whole structure with some options that allows them to have some time to actually look at what we're looking at, and I'll review it with them. Because we never want them to feel like we're pulling them along in the conversation, because they just want to get off the conversation with us.
Dustin, I have another question. Just like Jerry Norton, his Flipsters, there's so many tools in US. Do we have the same kind of tools here? We know more.
Don't get caught up in the tools.
More about properties, because we don't know if they owe money, or if there's equity in the house, if they paying a higher interest rate. We don't even know nothing about that.
But do we need to know that?
It makes it easier. We can get
Not
more,
really.
No?
No, I'll teach you something. The more knowledge we have before the deal, you'll put yourself in a category boxing that deal that it has to be that, by not actually understanding the seller's needs. Seller finance is, sometimes it's not about the numbers, it's about the needs. Like I have a seller right now, and all she needs is 40 grand. And she's willing to do the deal, give me the whole house for the whole term, but she needs 40 grand to relocate to Calgary. So I have to figure a way that I can go get that 40 grand that can close this deal. It obviously comes off the purchase price, but that was her need of doing the deal. So if I can fulfill that, she's going to be more inclined to work with me. So I've done that before, where I'm going to structure it this way, and now I go into it open. I just say, get me on the call. Let me hear the problems, let me hear what they need, and then I'll structure it from there. Because I get in my way of trying to fit a block like a square in a circle.
Makes
It's
sense.
funny, that's exactly what Pace says, right? You're there to solve a problem. You just have to listen to what the pain points are, right?
There's a little video where he says, find the bunnies or something like that, right? Yeah. So I've just always, like, what's the problem? Like, what do you need? You know, and some people are like, I have 500K, but I need 250K. Well, you're like, how the hell am I gonna do that, right? Well, what you do is you find a hybrid, you find a private lender, you can either find somebody that can do a traditional mortgage, and that's a little bit of, you know, a difference, because you can come in with a traditional mortgage that gives you the lower interest rate at the 250, but you still need to bridge that 250 in to show the bank that they can release that cash. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of work around it, and like I said, I just had to learn with no money. And you get extremely creative.
So, are you able to maybe walk me through hypothetical situation? Seller has a property that he's evaluated at $650,000. Doesn't want to budge on it. He's got $250,000 of equity, and he wants to move to Switzerland within 6 to 8 months. How would you approach this?
So what was the reason why he couldn't sell on the market?
He's asking too much, I think, but hasn't listed it yet.
So sometimes we have to be willing to walk away from the deals that don't make sense. And those type of guys, I don't want to fight them, because with me fighting on them on price and, you know, what it is, I'm looking like the bad guy. Yeah. You know, I just position it where, like, sounds like I'm not your buyer, maybe I can connect you with somebody. And then over time, you know, the market will beat them down on that price, and then they'll call me and say, yeah, you're right. Because I've had those where you're trying to do every deal you can and realizing like you're losing sight of the actual deals that are profitable because you're stressing out trying to make some deals. So I'm not saying that it couldn't work. It's just, you know, what makes, like, what's the ticker point? Like, why does he need his cash? Can you get that cash? Right? Are you able to work out a payment plan for his equity that makes sense for him, that you can service the property? Because I need to service the property, but I don't want to be paying $5,000 of equity each month. That just really bleeds me dry, right? So I want to figure out how I can get the tenant buyer or the tenant in there to pay for everything.
Sometimes if there's not enough motivation, then waiting is a great way to, you know, let the market show and give them more motivation. As his timeline gets closer, he's going to get more motivated. I think it's important, and this has happened to me. Is I think Pace calls it dealitis, where you just are focused on one deal, and you're like, how do I make this deal work? It's got to be a deal that I like the numbers. You fall in love with the house or whatever the property is or whatever. But at the end of the day, if we can't figure out what the motivation is of the seller and we can't solve that problem, there's maybe just not a deal, or it's not the right deal for us.
Yeah, and with seller finance, you kind of really got to angle it like, why don't they want to sell on the market, right? Like, you really got to identify that, because they're in a mode where they're like, you want what I got. But we can't show them that we want what they got, because they're going to control us. They're going to, you know, control our deal. Like, I had a seller that wanted a vendor take back. Their price was $699, free and clear property. They came back at a 6% interest. And I was like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And I cringe on interest. I don't like interest. So I just said, well, why don't we just give them an extra bit of money? I got it for a 10-year VTB, $1,600 a month principal only payments. So I just said, I'll give you an extra $25,000. So we closed the deal at $724 with no interest. Some people would be like, I can't pay that. Well, in 10 years, think about the appreciation. I don't bank my deals off appreciation. Appreciation is like 2%-ish. You know, even at 1%, that deal's still gonna go up. And with me having principal only payments of $1,600, I'm just making some money. But it goes back to what you said, is the price. they were focused on the interest, and I just pulled that away and I just said, let's get focused on this price. Because that interest, when you do the math long term, is going to eat me alive as opposed to paying that principal.
Does everybody understand what he said about a principal-only payment? Cool. Those are like the deals that dreams are made of.
Oh, you just like, you want it. You're just like, whoa.
Principal only, whew.
How long of a term did you have on that?
A 10-year.
Okay, that was here in Canada.
Yeah.
And so what strategy was that?
Vendor take back.
And was it free and clear, or was there?
Free and clear.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
So what I've noticed is up in Canada, everybody's so fixed on these 1 or 2, 3 year terms. Those will kill you. Because think about closing, think about putting a tenant in there, all that timeline. And even if you put a tenant in there, a tenant needs a year lease. So you're going to fight that year lease, you're going to fight everything. And if you can't close on that deal, you're going to be stressed. So I love dollar deals and doing the whole term. And I just tell them, typically we just match the loan amortization calculator so we can avoid prepayment penalties. And they don't even question at that point. And then I just wrap it up, and I love the dollar down and getting for the whole term.
Beautiful. Any other questions? We're going to bring Dustin around more often. This is great. Right?
I love seller finance because it's changed your life. Like once you do seller finance, you realize it's not the property anymore. You're literally hunting for the notes. You're looking for the notes that you can actually take over, because there is still those 2% loans. There's still those 3% loans that are coming in, and it does not make sense. And I'll even tell the seller, like, I tell them, like, for me to come bring the financing in, it's going to cost me more money to replace it. When I can just give you more money, we can leave everything in place.
But then here you have to renew the mortgage after every 3 or 5 years. Then
Well, then you just call the seller, and if you have a good rapport, your payments are being made. Like some of these sellers, when you start making the payments, they don't even question you because their credit's going up, because their payments are all being done. Like I get it where they'll email me and say, hey, there's a renewal coming up. They'll email me the renewal paper. Which term do you want? And I just say, oh, I want this term. And sometimes there's some friction on it and stuff like that, but it's all the nature of the deal. And sometimes on those renewals, if there's equity, if there's a chunk of equity, I'll say, well, can I give you 10 grand every renewal until the end, and I'll pay you the balloon.
but lender doesn't know about this, right?
There's a gray area with it. Lenders love to get paid. Lenders love to get paid. So kind of what he was saying, when he has that security, he knows the property's getting paid, there's nothing being done, what's the lender going to say, right? The lender really just cares about, can you make these payments? And
in Canada, it's interesting to know too, is that when you do transfer a title, the lender doesn't get notified. There's no, land titles doesn't send anything to the lender to say, hey, this property got transferred, right? So if you're doing some estate planning, for example, and you decide to take your property and put it into a trust, the lender doesn't get notified. So the only thing that changes is you would have to change your insurance, because you're now insuring a different entity that owns the property, and you need to give that new insurance update to your lender. And so if you're sending that off to some very busy, paper factory in Ontario, oftentimes nobody's going to catch it, nobody's going to care. But it happens every day. And Pace talks about this as well. He says, if you're doing some estate planning and suddenly, you get married and you want to add your wife to the title, you don't have to go and do anything with the bank. You just simply add her to the title, and nothing else needs to change. And so similarly in Canada, but the challenge, of course, in Canada is that every 3 to 5 years, mortgages come due. And so you've got to deal with that issue. But oftentimes, if you guys are, making your payments on time, usually they just send you the renewal letter. You initial it, you and you're good to go, and nobody knows the wiser. So I'm not recommending doing anything illegal, but it's interesting to see what actually does happen when a property transfers. And so we've had titles where we've bought something. Next time, do you guys want to hear a really crazy deal? Do you want me to explain to you a really crazy deal? Okay.
Come on, man, you're holding back from us. Jeez.
I'm going to use the TV as an example here, just to give you a bit of a visual. So when I joined the group, this deal already existed. So I came into it, and it took me a while to wrap my head around it. So what they had done is they had bought 6 lots in a row. They had done what's called a land assembly. Okay, and this was just by 16th Avenue, just in the northwest, just by Center Street. And there was these little old houses. One of them had a fourplex. There was 2 other homes, and the other lots were vacant. The properties had just kind of fallen over and been bulldozed. And so on the fourplex, they had gone out and they'd gone a regular bank mortgage. Okay, they got a Nova Scotia bank mortgage, I believe. On the other properties, I think one had a private loan, and there was another one with a very small, like I want to say $60,000 bank mortgage that they, I think, took over on a subject to, which is, again, not very common. So we have 3 different bank notes. And then what they did is they sold this entire land assembly to somebody on a giant wrap that wrapped around this, 3 different bank loans, plus they had, I don't think they had anything registered, but there were some other investors that had their capital in there. And I think they sold it for $3 million and they were carrying 1.5. So they had a $1.5 million wrap. And so if you looked at the title, it would look really weird. So this property would have a $1.5 million mortgage registered. This property would have a $1.5 million registered. This one would have $100,000 registered to CIBC Bank. And then behind it, a $1.5 million registered in second position, and same. And that's the deal that I walked into, and I was trying to wrap my head around. It took me about a week to figure out, I'm like, what, how, what? And so that's an example of a very creative strategy. Eventually, the buyer raised enough money to pay out the balance owing on the wrap. So they had taken title, right? On a wrap, you take title. And we got everything paid out. We received the 1.5, and then we paid out the various mortgages underlying, which is what you do with the wrap. And then we were paid out, and that was that. And they still have not actually built on that land. It's I think we're about 15 years ago now is when they bought that, and it's still just bulldozed flat land, just sitting there doing nothing. So that's an example of a very unique deal that, again, if somebody was to come to this seller and say, hey, I want to buy this, but I don't have $3 million to buy it, if you can come up with that strategy and show them like, hey, you can actually structure this deal and carry financing like this. Obviously, the seller and the buyer both had to be fairly creative in this situation. And in order to get that higher price, the seller, was willing to do something a bit creative to get that higher price. So anyway, that's my kind of unique example of something very creative that we did for a wrap. And yeah, I think that's about it. If there's any other questions I know you probably got more questions for him. He's the wealth of information.
Come on, bring him on.
The seller who sells it in Creative, the title still stays on their name, right?
Depending on what structure you're doing. If you're doing vendor take-back, the title transfers. If you're doing an agreement for sale, the title stays in. Essentially, it goes into a trust, beneficial ownership and everything. It just gets protected from there. So this is where my problem is learning seller finance. Is I learned the American way, and it really confused me because learning the mortgages and everything, and they just have a different terms and everything. And then once it clicked for me in Canada, I was like, oh, that's it. It was the last missing piece. And
the unfortunate thing is that a lot of lawyers and law firms don't know how to structure creative deals. So there's a handful of lawyers that do know what an agreement for sale is, and there's probably I'd say 80% of them real estate lawyers that have never heard of an agreement for sale. What's interesting is when I got licensed as a mortgage broker, I had done a number of agreement for sales with the apartment buildings, and there was one small paragraph in there that actually talked about agreement for sales, which I was like, oh, sweet, somebody else knows about these, and it's like a legit thing. So they do exist. They are I don't know how long they've been around for. I think they've been around since like coming over from England.
well, seller finance has been forever, right? Because farmers do seller financing. Everybody in this room did seller financing. And if you bought something and you paid somebody back with payments, you did seller financing. Whether it was a shirt or whatever it is, you did seller financing, right? And going back to what you said, like a lot of lawyers, I could be swimming in gold right now with the amount of deals that literally got to the end and the lawyer blew it because they didn't understand it. So I've been through a lot of lawyers myself, and I found good lawyers in certain cities, and I stick with them because they know how I work. You know, they're flexible. They understand that not every deal is the same, but they understand the nature of it. And you really just find somebody that's doing creative financing and find their lawyer. It will save you the deal. Like,
and help your buyer or your seller find a good lawyer as well that also understands it. Because
so I had a deal up in Rocky Mountain House, and I picked it up for $240,000. It was worth $330 on a 7-year agreement for sale. And the reason why it was 7 years is she had 2 more years left on her term. So I was going to pay out her equity on that term, and then I was going to carry it for another 5 years. I went to close it with a lawyer. 4 lawyers blew that deal. Yeah. I finally got him back because I said, you know what, I'm done with this. Because what I say is this, my question I say is, do you have a lawyer? You know, and I just want to know if they've done a deal or can they talk about the deal. I'm not going to challenge them. That just tells me that they're actually competent enough to do the deal. So I had to call another lawyer in Calgary that I knew to do the deal with the lady. The lawyer was going to send up a carrier for the paperwork. And I called that lawyer and I said, I have to drive it up myself. And then I drove it up to the seller, and the seller was an older lady, and she said to me, she says, if you didn't come up here, I would have blew the deal on you. Like I was like grinding after one lawyer after another, and I was like, oh my God, this is not going to work. So I had to take a day and just drive up the paperwork.
When you say they blew it up, like what does that?
So essentially, when they don't know it, they're going to cancel it.
The lawyer's going to cancel it.
Well, they're going to tell their client, because when a lawyer doesn't understand it, you know, I've caught lawyers learning seller financing. You know, I'm like, what's taking the deal so long? And it's turning out that they're trying to learn what seller financing is. And it's like, I don't have time for that.
yeah, so the challenge, and we run into this in the private lending side as well, is that when a lawyer's job is to help their client identify risks, to avoid, you know, being sued, and to be liable for certain things. So the minute they see something non-standard, they start raising flags. And especially if they don't understand it, they start raising flags, and then they start blaming the other side. Oh, this isn't legal. Oh, this isn't allowed. Oh, this isn't, you know, this person's ripping you off. So my favorite is somebody's going through foreclosure. Their credit is horrible. They can't get approved for anything. We offer to save them from foreclosure. We're going to give them a loan that's going to help them do this. And that loan is expensive, right? That money costs a lot of money, but it's going to save their house. They get to the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, oh, this is too expensive. You should never sign this. But the lawyer doesn't have a solution for the borrower. The lawyer's not going to lend them the money. And so they kill the deal. They essentially just kill the deal by giving what I would say improper advice. So their job is to comment on the law. It's not to comment on, you know, the business of the transaction. And I think that's where a lot of lawyers get mixed in, is they will give what I would consider bad advice or not great advice. And a good lawyer is always going to do that in order to try to protect themselves and their client, especially if they don't know and understand it. Does that make sense? So it's really important that, one, you find and understand which lawyers to use. We don't run into it very often, but occasionally we'll send a deal. The borrower's got their own lawyer, and it's in small town Alberta somewhere, and the lawyer they look at it and they go, "You're paying 14% interest? What are you doing?" And they convince the borrower not to do it. So anyway, it's part of the business. It's part of.
Just remember, realtors and lawyers don't pay your bills, so you got to be very careful on them dictating your deal, because a lot of times in the foreclosure send, these people come in, they're like, "I'm going through foreclosure," and the question is asked, "How much is it going to cost to catch up the arrears? Can I get a hold of that lender so I can catch up these arrears and put it all into good standings?" That doesn't happen all the time, because sometimes it's too deep in there or whatever. But the sellers don't understand that those lawyers are actually suing them, that they're working with them. Well, the lawyer wanted this, and I'm like, this lawyer's actually suing you right now.
It's the wrong lawyer.
Yeah, it's the wrong lawyer.
The lawyer's on the other side.
And then they
He's
don't
not there to
realize
help
that
you.
all the messages that you're sending that lawyer, they're billing you for.
The things that doesn't even make sense. Recently, I built a fourplex, and I needed some. It was almost done. I need some construction loan on that. So I went there. There's too much money. I already put it into that, and I need little bit more money. So I had to hire a lawyer. The lender approved everything. It was through Service Canada. And I hired a lawyer that they suggested that was doing deals with them before. He said he wanted my guarantee on it, personal, and I have another business. He said it's better if I put a guarantee of the business as well. Okay, let's do that as well. That business, I had a partner 3 years ago in that. So when he pulled all the titles and everything, it says 3 years ago I had a partner. He said, what happened to that? I said, I paid him off. He wanted him to come and sign it that 3 years ago he went out of this company. How I'm gonna bring him out from Toronto? He said, prove me how you paid him to go out the company. That thing, just to explain him, took me about 3 weeks. That I cannot bring him back. He cannot come and sign. I don't have proof that I can prove you that I paid him. Well, I can dig, but maybe there was different ways that I paid him. But I said, then lender is agreed to pay. They have no problem. Why you have a problem with that? Show me what the problem is. 3 years, 3 weeks later, he said, okay, then I have to sign it off. That yes, I dealt with it 3 years ago and it's gone. Everything went back again. I wasted 3 weeks.
So you know, sometimes we have to learn the lesson with these lawyers, and it hurts. I've had it where, you know, I had $100,000 payout and the lawyer blew it. That hurt a lot.
That cost you $250, just an email too.
That's why, you know, you got to be really careful and you got to know the right ones that you work with. And I've burned through a lot of them, not because it's been bad deals, it's because they don't have the competence to actually understand the deal. And I work with the ones that I work with now, and I call them, and you know, I'm able to communicate with them. They know the nature. I mean, they say to me, every deal you send me is always creative.
That's the lesson, the hard way you learn.
I learned the hard knocks, guys. Like, I didn't have somebody, you know, teaching me. I didn't have money to buy courses and all this stuff. I had to just literally go out and learn and just take the shots and everything. And, you know, I got a deal yesterday. A wholesaler called me, and it's a deal in Drumheller, and he picked it up for $100,000. He wants to put $50,000 into it for renovations, and he thinks the ARV could be, he's thinking 250 to 300. I'm thinking around 220, 230, right? Everyone's numbers are a little bit different. There's still a little bit of spread in there. But how could he have saved money on that deal from you guys? Right? If there was $100,000 to the seller and $50,000 for renos, how could we have saved that? Like, how can you save fees? Because lending on $150,000 is a lot more money when you're paying 15%, as opposed to saying, hey, Mr. Seller, you know, I'd rather leave the loan in place. I'd rather go lend out the $50K, pay their interest on the $50K, do the renovation, and I'll flip it and I'll pay everybody out. Exactly like Novation. Yep. It's just when you get moving, you realize that you have to learn how to get lighter as you move, because you can only do so many deals or you'll bog yourself down. And that's why you get creative. And when you have no money, you really learn how to piece these money together. And sometimes you have to bring in a money partner that wants 50% of the deal. But the saying is 50% of something is better than 0% of nothing.
Excellent. Well, guys, we're going to wrap it up. That's it for our presentation. But now that we're finishing, what we want to do is we always reserve some time for networking. So one of the biggest things that you'll learn about real estate, and if you don't already know, is that real estate is a people business. Pace says that, you know, there's not a single real estate deal that ever gets done with one person. And so, you know, meeting people that are lenders, fix and flippers, contractors, wholesalers, bird doggers, you know, anything and everything, it's important that you share with people what it is that you're doing. So in the networking, and this is something that I struggle with still to this day, is I'm pretty introverted. I don't really enjoy networking events. I don't really like awkwardly going up to somebody and shaking their hand. I'm trying to push myself to new levels and grow. But one of the things that Pace again teaches is, he says the things you want to do when you're networking is you want to share with people what it is that you have to offer and make sure that they also know what it is that you're looking for. And ideally, as you're going through the room, you might connect somebody and you say, actually, I was just talking to Frank. Frank's got a lot and he's looking for somebody to help him build it. And so this is how the networking works. This is the whole reason why we get together in person. Since COVID, there hasn't been a lot of in-person things. We're still getting used to coming out of our houses and coming out of our shells and getting back and doing some of this in, belly to belly type of stuff. But this is where deals happen and this is where relationships are built. So I encourage you guys to stick around. There's some refreshments. We're going to have, just in front of the sign over there, I'm going to pull a few of you guys aside and just do a quick filming and ask you just some of your highlights from tonight, some of your takeaways. Part of the plan for the group is to continue to grow. We're looking for more sponsors. We're looking for a bigger venue, and we're looking for you guys to also invite your friends and colleagues. We've got this amazing gentleman who showed up to do a professional recording so that we can also post it. So you guys, once you see this, you can share it again on your socials. And we'd love to see this number double by the time Stampede rolls around. So thanks again for everybody for coming. We'll look forward to chatting and meeting with you. If you guys have questions about that deal, come say howdy. All right, guys, thanks so much.